Hey everybody, welcome back to One Seed, One World. So I'm out here doing some August planting today. And you might think that it might be kind of weird to start planting things in August. But there are a lot of things that you can plant this time of year that will do well for a fall garden. And a lot of this is going to depend, of course, where you live. If you're farther north, probably, up zones 5, 4, 3, on up, you might have less time to plant or a limited amount of types of plants that you can put in. Now here in Western Maryland, I'm in zone 6B, and so my average frost date is around October 15th. And so that gives me about 59 days left before my first average frost. Now, of course, sometimes it can be later and sometimes it can be earlier. More often, it seems, the last couple of years, it seems to be later. In fact, just a couple of years ago, I was still picking tomatoes out in the garden up until the week before Thanksgiving. So you never know. But even if it hits at that time, there are some crops that you can put in that are either frost tolerant or grow really quickly and give you time to get things in. Example is like kale. Kale is frost tolerant and actually prefers or actually gets better tasting after it's maybe been hit with a couple of light frost. And when I've planted kale in my hoop bed where it's covered and a little bit more protected from more severe weather, I've been out here harvesting kale in the snow. So kale and other collard greens will take some frost. Something else that you can put in is spinach. Spinach is not quite as tolerant, but it does take some light frost and will last deep into the fall. And then there's things like Swiss chard. These are a lot of greens that we're talking about here, but Swiss chard can handle a little bit of light frost and does really well growing into the fall for a second crop. Then you can have things like radishes. This type of radish here, Saxa 2, is actually a very quickly growing radish and can be ready in about 3 to 4 weeks. So I could be pulling radishes by mid-September with these here. I've also got some carrots. Now carrots might be a little bit of a stretch, but this is a smaller variety. They tend to grow a little bit faster, so we're going to try those. And I've got some other random things, some lettuces and stuff that come up pretty quickly. Now when you're figuring out particular crops that you want to be able to grow, and if you have time to grow them, what you want to look at is both the germination time, average germination time for that plant, as well as their date to maturity, how many days it takes to get to maturity for you to be able to harvest a crop. You have to add those two together. So for example, with the spinach, now here's the cool thing, let me go into this first, is the cool thing is that like when you plant in the spring, your soil is much cooler and the temperatures are much cooler. So a lot of times when you're starting seeds outside, they will take longer to germinate. The example that I started to bring up was spinach. In the spring, when temperatures are around 50 degrees, spinach can take up to 3 weeks before it germinates and really starts to sprout. Whereas if you are planting spinach in the late summer, where it's, your soil temps are maybe 75 degrees or so and it's hot outside, your spinach can germinate as quickly as 4 to 5 days. And so when you're planting some of these things in the summertime, there's a good chance that they are going to germinate and sprout much faster than they would than when you plant them in the early springtime. So that gives you a little bit of a buffer, a little bit of extra time to be able to work with it. So with me putting in spinach now today, I'm expecting by the next, by the middle of next week, it should have germinated if I've got some good seeds here. And then that will shorten the time for me to be able to get the spinach up and harvested, because spinach takes about 45 days to get to maturity. Same thing with like Swiss chard, kale, they're kind of like all around the same time. So that should give me about 50 days before I can harvest, but you know, that gives me an extra week and a half leeway before I even have to worry about first frost on my average first frost date for coming into the fall. So take a look at what kind of things you want to plant, look at what their germination rates are and what their days to maturity are, and then try planting some things in your garden, because you will probably have some empty spaces in your garden now. Like I've harvested beets and onions and cleared out several like 4x4 spots, 8x4 spots. I've got different little sections in the garden where I can start fitting in all these different greens, radishes, things like that, that I can then eat into the fall, and with some of them possibly even into the winter. I think the latest that I was ever able to harvest things was that kale, and that was around the end of January that I was out here picking kale in a snowstorm in my hoop bed. So sometimes you have to give them a little extra cover, and I'll put the link down below on how you can do a hoop bed on the video I did on that a couple years ago if you want to check that out. But even if you don't protect them, there are some crops that will do okay at least with some frost, and you can do some harvesting into the winter time. But whatever's going on in your neck of the woods, I hope it's working out fantastic for you and that you are getting a fall garden started if you haven't already. But thanks for hanging out again with me today. We will see you again soon. Namaste.